You couldn't script it any different. I mean, you couldn't script it at all, in fact. Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing, in a week where one of the most bizarre headlines I've ever seen in racing comes out about a racing team. A team that has never won in this class on the racetrack pulls off a 1-2 after tumultuous doesn't even just begin to describe the week that they've had. But that's the magic of Indianapolis. I mean, it's unbelievable. You can just hear the energy as the podium ceremonies are going on right now for AO Racing, which of course is one of the most popular teams in IMSA. And I would say that today was a good day. The Colts won. We had BMW finish 1-2, which I think is a surprise. I don't think anybody really expected that to happen. And it comes in a week, of course, that I just mentioned was so crucial for the Rahal Letterman Lanigan team to kind of get spirits up over there. Talking about Rahal, I guess that'll be the first thing. I mean, we know about the FBI raid. That, of course, not related to the IMSA program. That related on the IndyCar side. But the teams, of course, are related, right? So, you know, to do what they have done, which is win a race for the first time on the racetrack. Now, it's important to note that they were awarded the victory at Watkins Glen last year, ironically enough, also in a 6-hour race. But that was after Team Penske was disqualified. The Penske Porsche was disqualified for a ride height violation. They ran their car too low, ran off too much of the skid plate, and they didn't pass tech at the end of the day. And that provided the 25 BMW with the victory. The winning car today was the 24, driven by Philipp Eng and Jesse Krohn. And the interesting thing about that is that that particular BMW car, the 24, has not finished on the podium in any class since 2021 here in IMSA. That's unbelievable. I mean, you want to just keep adding layers to the craziness of this particular win for BMW RLL. That's it. Let's keep saying it. Not only did they finish 1-2, and yes, there was some strategy involved, but the BMW was up there all day long, legitimately passing Cadillacs and Porsches on track. And I think we went into this race thinking that it was going to be Cadillac versus Porsche, and at the beginning it sure looked like that. But the BMWs were right there, and this is as emphatic a win, as legitimate as of a win, a win on speed. I mean, all the things that you can say about a win, I would say that BMW ticked every box. So I just think that it's a legitimate win. There's no doubt about it. And it's something that the program needed too, right? I mean, you think about the fact that they hadn't won a race on the racetrack. Questions are always floating around about this program and the performance of it, especially now that WRT runs the program over in Europe and has found some speed in the car. But for Rahal to deliver the first win for the BMW LMDH or GTP or whatever you want to call it, hypercar, is appropriate because they're the team that did all the development work on it, that got it up to speed and got it in a position where it could go race in the World Championship and race at Le Mans. So I think that's a point that we need to continue to emphasize. Let's talk a little bit more about the race itself. You know, kind of interesting that 219 laps were completed today, and the race distance, or the track distance, is just under 2.5 miles. So it works out that this 6-hour race was more or less just about 500 miles, just a little bit over that. It's the right number here at Indy, I would say. Let's talk about some of the other class winners. TDS won in LMP2. IndyCar fans will know the name Hunter McElrea. He did a little bit of pinch hitting for Dale Coyne Racing earlier this year in the IndyCars and hopes to be back next year. But certainly a great win for Hunter. And of course, Mikkel Jensen of Peugeot fame also in the driving lineup there. GT, a lot of things to talk about here, as there always is in GT. It was a perfect weekend for Porsche. AO Racing, as I mentioned, the Rexy car won in GTD Pro, and Wright Motorsports was, you know, kind of uncharacteristically for GTD, and I'm not saying just for them, just about any team in GTD, uncharacteristically, they were pretty dominant in GTD. There really wasn't another team that was able to challenge them throughout the second half of the race. The other important point about Rexy, the AO Racing Porsche, is that they started last. I mentioned that yesterday. They had a ride height violation. Tell me whether you've heard that one before. They were kicked to the back of the field. They qualified on the pole. They clearly had the speed, and they demonstrated it over 6 hours today. But I should also mention that while Rexy was clearly the class of the field, today was I think a milestone day for the Ford Performance side of things as well with Multimatic there, because they finished second today. At points, we're leading the race in GTD Pro. So I think the Ford win is coming, whether it comes here at the end of the year at Petit Le Mans or at the beginning of next year, who knows? But I think it's pretty soon for that program. It's on its way. Let's get into some of the meat and potatoes about some of this race. And I think one of the things that I've really emphasized quite a bit, and other content creators have about IMSA, and unfortunately I kind of previewed it yesterday, and I told you it was going to be a thing, and it's the cautions, the full course yellows, to use a sports car term. They're too long and they're too readily called. Now, here's the issue that IMSA kind of runs into is that they do have local yellows, but they're not used very often, and there's no real regulation about how slow you have to go through them. Of course, you can't race through them, but it's not like in Europe where you have the ability to do virtual safety cars or slow zones. And for me, I think this is my number one wish for IMSA next year. I think they need to find some way when it's a single car spin into a gravel trap to neutralize the field in a specific section of the race course and keep the race going. Because for me, if you're a casual fan or even a longtime hardcore fan, when you come out here and the first 2-3 hours of the race are broken up by 20, 30, 40, 50-minute cautions, it hurts your experience. And I think, again, you obviously want to keep the show going, right? You want to make sure that everybody's close, there's not too many cars going laps down. But it's too much. The yellows are way too long for the incidents that are causing them. And I think the fix is very easy. You just have to look over to Europe and the World Endurance Championship, and they've got it because the racing is absolutely awesome here in IMSA when it's green. And I think that's what this series should continue to emphasize, good racing. Speaking of good racing and some of the excitement today, and also kind of to the caution point, was the wet weather we saw. I told you it was coming yesterday, and it poured down right about noontime, just about 20-30 minutes into the race, and it really threw a wrench into this race early on, kind of as I expected it would. But it certainly kept the racing close too. The different strategies, when do you go to slicks, when do you stay on the wets, that was quite a compelling aspect of this race. Now, unfortunately, one of the longest yellow of the race was because there was a car that threw it off the racetrack. I don't remember exactly which one. I feel like it might have been one of the Ferraris, but the yellow came out. Then there was a pit sequence, which of course IMSA has a whole procedural sequence for pit stops that they have to follow due to the regulations. And then then the track got too wet because the cars weren't running around it fast enough. And so it was a whole bunch of different things that resulted in that yellow being super long for safety reasons, which is understandable. And it probably would have gone down a little bit easier if there hadn't been a bunch of yellow flags before then that really slowed down the pace and the excitement of this race. But I think the racing quality otherwise, and we'll touch on it towards the end of the video, was absolutely excellent here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. A lot better than I thought it was going to be. Shout out to Lamborghini and their third race for their GTP car. Obviously, they've run it a little bit more in the World Endurance Championship, but I think that they did a fantastic job today. Obviously, the car took the lead at points. It was running up front, legitimately so. Romain Grosjean in the mixed conditions, the wet, was right up there. In fact, nerfed his way into the lead against one of the Penske Porsches at one point. Unfortunately, they had too many men over the wall, got a penalty for that, and then later on in the race, they still didn't recover their lap, ran into the Ford Mustang of Proton, and that really took them ultimately out of the race. But this was the first race where Lamborghini, at least stateside, has really shown a lot of race pace, and so that's something to look forward to, not only at Petit Le Mans next month, but also to look ahead to the future in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. Lamborghini definitely finding their footing, being a little bit behind the other manufacturers even. Let's talk about Indianapolis, right? I think that there's a lot of talk, legitimate concerns too, right? This race cost most sport GTP. This race replaced Mid-Ohio. This race, some would say, replaced Lime Rock on the calendar. These are all classic venues that fans have supported for years and years. And you say, why does Indianapolis deserve this as a sports car event, right? I think there are a lot of questions about that. I mean, obviously the answer is that Roger Penske owns this facility, and Roger Penske races 2 cars in IMSA and supports IMSA very strongly. And he wanted the race here. Totally understandable. But the question mark, of course, for everybody was, if you're going to put an endurance race here, is it going to be worthwhile? And I think it was. I think the racing quality alone is what is the draw for this race. This track is super tight, having 56 cars out there and all of that traffic and all of that unpredictability, I think really, really added to this event and made it a worthwhile addition to the IMSA calendar. Now, are there things that can improve here? Yes, I think one of the things that kind of hurt this event was, number one, going against the Indianapolis Colts. Congrats on your win today. And that's difficult because you never know what the NFL is going to schedule. But also, I think, coming a week after the IndyCar finale didn't give ample time to really hype this race up. I think there were a few other things, sports car-wise, that you can market that you don't necessarily have to market or wouldn't necessarily market in like an IndyCar sense, right? Yes, there's a heavy focus on drivers, and you want to focus on drivers, and you want to hope that you have some star drivers coming here. But some things, I think, got lost in the cracks. I think the fact that this was the 3rd race for the Lamborghini prototype wasn't promoted enough. I feel like you always have to have some sense of urgency. You got to come to this race. You got to experience this. But you also got to answer the question for the fans who might be buying a ticket, why do you need to experience it? And if you can't get the big IndyCar drivers to come out and run this thing for one reason or another, you have to find what the good positives of IMSA are. And the good news for next year is just put out a highlight reel of the racing quality that we saw here this year. I also think IMS did a really good job with the fan experience. They've worked a lot to make this a more fan-friendly and accessible road course. And with the camping, that felt like a real race, a real road course. And also with the sound system, you can even hear it. It's fantastic. They've done a great job to improve it over the years. And there's video boards all over the facility. So you really are never going to be missing out on the action if you decide to move around this track. So I would give it high marks for a first year with the endurance aspect to it. And I think there's some ways to improve it next year. And hey, Santa Claus, can we run this race into the night next year? That would be my other ask, I suppose. Crowd seems to like that. I know they're not cheering for that. Yeah, like I said, I think, at the end of the day, this was a success for IMS, IMSA, and obviously BMW and all the teams that won here today. I think there's room to improve, of course, there always is, but I think it's a good first step with IMSA and endurance racing here at Indy, and hopefully we can grow this thing into a real endurance racing classic. And you know what, at the end of the day, as a race fan, and I speak as a race fan here, when you entertain me, you put on a good show, and you have an exciting battle all the way through a 6-hour race, you're going to leave me satisfied. And I was satisfied with this race. Now, could IMSA change the caution procedures? Yes, and they should. Could there have been more people here? Yes, and there will be. And I'm looking forward to being back here in 2025 for the 2nd annual 6 hours at Indianapolis, or the tire rack battle on the bricks, however you want to call it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the coverage. More stuff to come next week, don't you worry. In fact, I'm probably going to end up doing a video on Monday. There's some things that have come out about IndyCar that you need to know about. We'll see you in the next video.